Welcome to the Framingham Public Schools and Framingham High School, which, by the way, was just rated the 25th best high school in Massachusetts by U.S. News & World Report. I am Beverly Hugo, Chair of the Framingham School Committee, and tonight in my role as Chair of the Boston Metropolitan Region Division II of the Massachusetts Association of School Committee Members. I thank all of you for coming tonight and being part of the conversation of the implementation of the Common Core standards and its testing tool, the PARCC exam, the Partnership for Assessment for College and Career Readiness. Tonight's program will begin with remarks from our distinguished panel, Dr. Stacy Scott, our superintendent of the Framingham Public Schools, Dr. Ed Gartgart, our Chief Financial Officer, and Mrs. J. Goodwin, our elementary school teacher from Dunning and the 2010 Massachusetts Teacher of the Year. We'll follow with a question and answer, comment and sharing period where we will hear how your districts are adapting and the implications that you have been facing. Following the program, we will have District 2 elections for leadership for the 2014-16 year, and during that time, if you're not part of Division 2, you can go out and enjoy the rest of the refreshments. We always appreciate having our teachers and community members here with us. I will be introducing our guests in our panel in just a minute. Tonight, we want to take a specific look at how your districts must prepare and pay for the introduction of the new curriculum and assessment system. The Common Core Curriculum and Performance Assessment for College and Career Readiness, PARCC, have become hot-button issues. Originally, Common Core was linked to the Race to the Top grant. It was non-controversial at the time because it gave us more flexibility. It updated the curriculum frameworks, and it was years away from 2010, that is. Suddenly, it has become a major controversy. Some on the political right opposed the Common Core and the PARCC assessment because they treated MCAS and the curriculum frameworks. They created the MCAS and the curriculum frameworks, and they fear their work will be repudiated. Others on the right oppose PARCC as being weaker than MCAS as an assessment. Others on the right oppose it as Obamacare and make it a partisan issue. Some on the left oppose PARCC because it represents more and more testing of students who are already stressed out. And this is a very, very complex set of issues, it's a curriculum and assessment based on critical thinking. Educators will need to adapt to work within it. Testing will be recalibrated to new scores, and educators always fear that those who misuse data will abuse these new scores to mislabel students. Do we really know if Common Core is a better way than our traditional curriculum frameworks? Is PARCC an improvement over MCAS? In summary, if you're not confused, you're not paying attention. For our administrators and our legislators, there are some important public policy questions. How will we pay for all of this? Who will obtain the data from the tests? DESE has stonewalled us on this question. How much of these data will be used to assess the performance of teachers, principals, administrators, and school districts as a whole? How closely does the legislature watch DESE, an agency that seems to be accountable only to itself? So to begin, let me introduce our guests and our panelists to begin the discussion, very specifically about how a school district begins the dialogue and planning to implement the new curriculum and testing, and how the school committee plays the role. First, I'm so pleased to introduce our legislators who have come tonight. Our own state Senator Karen Spilker, whom Framingham is blessed to have representing us. We call a certain amendment that she has We call a certain amendment the Spilker Amendment. She was instrumental in adjusting the Chapter 70 formula that has not been changed since 1993, so that Framingham has received about $15 million more in funds over the last several years. The formula has been unfair to Framingham, and Senator Spilker, along with her colleagues in the legislature, have helped adjust it to level the playing field for Framingham. We thank you, Senator. Would you like to say a few words and perhaps a quick update on the budget? Thank you.
I want to thank Bev for inviting me to be here. I actually started out in the late 1990s coming to these meetings and sitting on your side as a member of the school committee, which helped me get a great start to be in the legislature. So I want to thank all of you for what you do day in, day out in helping our kids have a better quality of education, a better chance at that, and for all that you do all the time. It's a thankless job at times, I know that, but you are all greatly appreciated. We in the legislature have focused a lot on Chapter 70 and education funding, despite it being a recent economic recession, the second worst since the Great Depression of the 30s. We have made a point of continuing to not only fund education, but to increase the amount of funding, recognizing that we made a commitment. There was the change that was made in 2006 that Bev is referring to, that myself, Tom Senecandro, and Chris wasn't there yet, but I know he worked here, and Carolyn Dykema, who's here, all of us together worked hard to make these changes, to make it more fair and equitable, and yet to increase the amount, to fight to increase the overall amount, so people continue to see, hopefully, increases. There have been some tough times, but Chapter 70 has been a priority. And not only in funneling funds for Chapter 70, but I'm proud to say that I've been one of the chief sponsors for fully funding the special ed circuit breaker, because that is something that we know really helps every single community in our state. School transportation helps, and all the other accumulative impact that helps our kids, and that has been a real priority for the legislature. So I'm sure all of you know the House did its budget, the Senate did its budget. Some of the things like Chapter 70 and unrestricted local aid were pre-conferenced, and that will not change, but a lot of the other things are up in the air. There are other bills that are still being debated in the legislature. There is a charter bill that the House did a couple of weeks ago. It will be coming to the Senate. So if you have thoughts on that, please let your state senator, if it's me, let me know, and if you have another state senator, make sure your voice is heard on that, because that will definitely be taken up. And there are other things that will be taken up. I am thankful. This issue, the Common Core and PARCC testing, is something that I hear about several times a week. Some communities, it's being implemented and it's pretty smooth. Some communities, it's not so smooth, and there is a lot of concern and almost uproar over, I have to say. So I think that there still is some work to be done. I think the Common Core is here to stay, and when you realize, and what I hear from parents is sometimes, if we're #1 in the country, why are we changing this? Why aren't we just sticking with the current curriculum and MCAS and not making any changes? And I understand what they're saying, and I do not hold myself out as an education expert, but I realize our kids are competing globally now. We cannot just be rest on our laurels of being #1 in the country. We need to ensure that our kids can compete with the kids from China and India and any other place in the world. And we have to raise our standards a little bit for that. So that's something that I think, we all can work towards. The PARCC testing, I'm looking forward to getting the feedback on that, to hear how it was implemented. There are some legitimate concerns about the implementation, such as not all communities have the same technology to implement that. And so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out and what the Board of Education ultimately decides to do. But I still believe, and I was talking with Superintendent before, as I believed when we first implemented even MCAS more than 10 years ago, that we should be continuing to look at alternative forms of judging and assessing our kids, not just focusing on tests, that there still are many alternative ways to do this, and that we shouldn't put that aside, that should still be on our radar. And again, if these issues are important, and let your legislator know, we may not have direct input or impact or decision-making in all of this, but it's important that we know, and we do end up funding what they decide or not, as sometimes the case may be. So thank you very much. Enjoy the program. Thank you. Thank you, Bev. Thank you. Thanks. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. State Rep Tom Sanacandro, Chair of the Joint Committee of Higher Education, is also an extremely valuable person in the legislature. He has been instrumental in leveling the playing field for all children from K to 12 and in higher ed. Representative Sanacandro, would you like to say a word and a quick update of the House, perhaps?
Thank you, Bev. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I just want to put this in a little bit of a context. I have the privilege of being the House Chair on the Joint Committee on Higher Education. So PARCC and the Common Core are issues that I'm dealing with all the time, as well as working with the board and the Department of Higher Education. And I just want to put what we're talking about today in a frame that we all can think about. The biggest issue that we have, or that we have had, and why we're looking at PARCC, is because even though we are putting out the students that are scoring best in the world, or scoring in the top of the world from Massachusetts, the problem is that when our students that come from our K-12 system show up in higher education, up to 65% of them are not prepared to do college work. That's huge. And our number is not any different than the rest of the country. So that if we are, in fact, producing these students that are doing so great, why are they not prepared to do college work? The problem is that what we're looking at, and what the Board of Higher Ed is looking at, is the issue of what do we do with these, how do we assess these students? People and parents particularly are thinking, well, my student passed MCAS, they should be ready to do college or college work. But then when they show up to college, if they're not prepared to do college work, they end up in remedial classes. Remedial classes cost money, and they don't get college credit for it. So that's an issue on efficiencies and a whole lot of things. So what we're doing with the PARCC exam is trying to align the K-12 system with higher education to make sure that the students, as they go through the K-12 system, are prepared to do college work. That's the purpose, and that's why we're looking at it. And I'll just give you another inside baseball piece. The PARCC test that we're looking at this point, I think there may be something like 20 or so states that are looking at it with leadership. The leadership from PARCC is actually all here in Massachusetts. Commissioner Freeland, the Secretary of Education, they are all involved in directing PARCC. So Massachusetts is leading the issue on PARCC for not just Massachusetts, for a number of states. So that's why we're here talking about this. That's why this is critically important. We have to be able to prepare our students for higher education. So thanks for inviting me, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Our state rep, Chris Walsh, is here. Representative Walsh is a staunch advocate for our public schools. He listens, he gets the facts from all stakeholders, he analyzes, and he gets results in a collaborative way. I'm so pleased to present State Rep Chris Walsh.
Thank you, Bev. I was going to vault up on the stage, but I figured that would actually give away really how old I was as you saw me trying to do that. So first I would like to welcome everybody here. Both of my kids went through the public school system here in Framingham. They both went to this high school. Actually, we're on in many stages on this various stage, and went to the finals. I think both of them went to the finals in various stage productions. So I'm a huge supporter of public school education. The issue, and you see Representative Dykema had another event she had to go to. She had to leave, but I wanted to say that the legislators that you have here, and in fact really the legislators in the State House, really get the issue that education is the foremost piece of what we do here in Massachusetts. There's a phrase that kicks around the State House a little bit, and I know Tom's used it and I use it, which is, education is to Massachusetts as oil is to Saudi Arabia. It is what we do here. It is why people come here. It is why kids from Korea come to school in Massachusetts, and kids from all over the world come here because this is what we do. Just because we do it well right now doesn't mean that everybody isn't catching up. I had a doctor the other day that I was seeing down at my primary cares, a physician who was a young lady from India, from a small town in India, who said that in her father's generation, no woman went to school. But in a generation, she is now a doctor of optometry here in the United States. And most of the world realizes that this is the way that you actually create a civil society and push ahead. So to rest on our laurels, I think we all realize would be really foolish. So all of these, and I think Representative Santacandro really put it out, that what we constantly are kicking around are how do we marshal whatever forces and marshal whatever monies we have to do the best job. And it's difficult because the idea of what an educated person is a moving target. So I think one of the slams against the MCAS was people teaching to the test. And instead of people educating children to want to learn forever and want to be lifelong learners. And so this constant adjustment of how you actually create a situation where you're not really teaching to a test, not trying to just get past the standard and not have those skills that Tom talked about by the time you get to college is a critical juncture. And I think that looking at this, looking at PARCC, the work that Stacy and Bev and the whole school committee and all of the teachers like Jay Goodwin, what they do is critical to our future here in Massachusetts, New England, and the United States. So what Karen, Tom, and I do is do our best to support what everybody here does. So again, thank you for coming. Thank you for being participants. And Bev, that's good.
Thank you. We are being filmed tonight to be broadcast on local cable television. We are also going to use the taping to be put on our Massachusetts Association of School Committee website as a podcast. We also have the press here. We have Scott O'Connell from the Metro West Daily News, and we have Susan Petroni from the online Framingham Patch. I am pleased to see so many people in the audience from our newly elected Board of Selectmen, Cheryl Tully-Stoll, Betty Funk from the Finance Committee, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say our team in Framingham for School Committee. If you could just raise your hand: Jim Stockless, Don Taggart, Andy Lemary, Dr. Eric Silverman, Heather Connolly, and Michelle Brosnahan is nursing a broken foot. So, tonight we hope to answer these questions. What is the difference between the MASC curriculum frameworks and the MCAS in the Common Core and PARCC? What does it measure? How? What is the difference in teaching with the different curriculums? What are some of the technological skills our kids need to know? Why can't the MCAS be updated to accommodate the Common Core? What is the anecdotal feedback from its implementation in Framingham? How are students that are English language learners and students that are special needs deal with this test? Where do we go from here? Who will be part of the decision? What is our role as school committee members in the decision? And what are the implications? So before I introduce our panel, we do have 3 handouts that you can take before you leave. One is a paper written by Paul Schlickman about the bottom 10% and the cap of charter school payments. The other is the request from the Department of Ed of who is eligible to receive our student performance data, and also a ruling by our attorney, Stephen Finnegan, about the role and responsibility in deciding and giving school committees the right to decide policy and whether to implement PARCC. So without further ado, our distinguished panel of guests, we will begin with our superintendent, Dr. Stacy Scott.
Thank you, Ms. Hugo. Appreciate your support and your introduction. Thank you to all of our Congress folks who are here and other elected officials. We greatly appreciate your support and your presence here tonight, and to our parents and friends and from those from other districts. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to try to be brief in the interest that your questions will guide us to those things that you really would like to hear about. But we're obviously at a juncture where, as a district, at our next school committee meeting, our school committee will look at a vote to determine whether or not to go forward with the election to do the PARCC solely in the coming year, or whether we'll continue to do the MCAS in that coming year. My recommendation, to really jump to the point and then go back through the process, is for us to leap forward and for us to make an election to dive into the MCAS and allow our district to begin to get ready for what is the next direction, the next generation of testing in the state and in a sense in the industry. My own experience with respect to the statewide testing goes back at least 20 years, because 21 years ago I was on the State Board of Education when we passed when we made the decision to go with the MCAS and began the process of shifting over to it. That was a decision that we made very thoughtfully and carefully as we looked at where's the standards movement taking us in terms of moving us as an industry to the place where our standards are clearly recognized in terms of what we expect all students to be able to know and to be able to do, and how can we reflect that in our assessments in a way that allows us to, with confidence, or increasing confidence at least, feel like we are directing instruction and directing learning in a way that allows us to continue to raise the capacities of our students overall. That evolution process, certainly in terms of the standards movement over the last 20 or 30 years, is ongoing. And I think that the PARCC in some respects is a leap forward. My only critique of it in some respects is that we could even be leaping farther relative to the opportunities that technology and our own learning is affording us. Nevertheless, this is the step forward that is in front of us, and I accept it because from my perspective, we learned how to get good at the MCAS. When I came to Framingham and talked to teachers, and they thought about PARCC and they wondered what was going to happen, and 2 years ago there's a lot less answers than there are now, but their concern for me was we don't mind moving forward. We're okay with making the shift, but we had years to get ready to be as good as we are at MCAS, and we've gotten pretty good. Our high school produces students typically in 88, 89, 94, et cetera, proficiency rates in terms of the MCAS and the critical subjects. So we have honed our capacity to be good at that assessment and to learn how to use that assessment as a mechanism for driving increasing learning. The challenge is that all that there is? Is it possible that we could go further in terms of using assessments as a means for focusing and driving instruction in a way that's even a further advance than we currently have come so far? You may recall, let's assume that the technology is still going to work for us, what MCAS looked like before. And in the mid-90s, 95, 96, I remember going into a lot of our schools in Boston, principals and teachers on how to think about the statewide testing and looking at the sample elements, and we had lots of elements. This is all filler while you get ready to give me your answer. We worked on, with teachers, thinking about what does it take to help students to be able to think at this level. If you've ever looked at the 4th grade MCAS, as I did in those years, you begin realizing how you can sweat through some of those questions because they are fairly challenging. The 8th grade, even more challenging, as is also the 10th grade. Now, we look at those tests now and we say they could be more rigorous. We should be pushing our students further. Well, in many ways, we're recognizing that a lot of our instruction, a lot of our curriculum is at least 2 years behind where it probably should be relative to the current levels of rigor that we want for our students and when we look at national and international standards. So, of course, we're doing the upgrading necessary. So by now, you've probably figured out your answer to that question. And kudos, hats off to you. I bet you figured out what the answer is. Here, I'll tell you what it is. Assuming that technology wants you to know. And if not, I'm going to have to ask someone to actually do it for us. Okay, there it is. So you got it right? Did anyone get it wrong? You can stay after for the remedial class. Now, the challenge becomes that our questions are becoming more complex. When you look at PARCC, any minute now, when you look at a PARCC element, any minute now, when you look at a PARCC question, what you see is a higher degree of complexity in the answers. Ed, can I ask you to manually get down there and move things around for us? Because sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't want to. Our challenge is that the questions are becoming more complex. Now, take a look at this question and recognize some of the simplicity or the relative simplicity of the question in contrast to the other question. And you might recognize that, relatively speaking, this is a question that you could begin to understand. But when you begin adding in the greater depths of complexity that this new assessment will take students to, you begin to realize some of the challenge. So now students are asked not only to be able to make a basic assessment about what is the answer, can I get the same number, rounding these 3 together, begin to see how they might do that. The real issue is the question is if 2 students were to get one answer, but another student was to get a different answer, how might that be? Now, not only do you have to be able to understand the basic logic of rounding to be able to get an answer, you have to understand how students could, in fact, come to 2 different answers, which is, of course, a more complex question. Can they both be correct? Explain how you know that. So the next generation of testing will ask students to explain their logic, to not only understand the basic kinds of answers that are necessary given the academic skills that they may need, but to be able to explain their logic. Next slide. So both are assessing rounding, the early questions for the MCAS, as well as the question for PARCC. And these are, of course, aligned to the Common Core standards. You see it's moving in terms of its complexity and in terms of the degree of understanding that is being required of students. Now they're being asked to show their reasoning, to critique the reasoning of others. Now that's metacognition at a higher level. We want our students to get out into the work world and be able to do that. So we have to change our instruction to make sure that happens, and naturally we would want to change the assessment to model that particular kind of thinking. So communicate their reasoning. They also have to be able to communicate it. Those are additional skill sets that would require some additional instruction for students to be able to, in fact, show that. So students are now being asked to demonstrate their reasoning in a much more complex way. Now let's shift over to English language arts, and you can also see the level of complexity that students had. Students would formally be asked to read a paragraph and answer A, B, C, or D. What do they think might be the appropriate answer to a series of questions? Here, they're taken into a much greater level of depth in terms of looking at a passage and being able to choose the details that might best support the main idea. And now they have to also be able to technologically be comfortable enough to drag and drop their answers from one place to another, and to also show that with respect to supporting details, drag and drop once again. And then they have to go into the greater levels of depth of complexity. Which two details from the article help support answers to part A? So they have to be able to understand logical argument, and to be able to demonstrate when a logical argument is being made and how to, in fact, communicate that in a rational way. So here, they're needing to understand how to provide evidence, how to find it, and how to drag and drop it and pull it and put it in a place where you can clearly demonstrate that it is the answer. The complexity of the test has increased, and their need to compare two texts at the same time. So they might, in fact, have one text and another text in front of them on the screen at the same time, and they're having to drag and drop evidence from the two in order to be able to show how they are similar and different. If that's not clearly different from the kind of assessments that we have now, then I don't know how else to explain it to you. But our challenge and the reason that we're wanting to increase the complexity was well spoken by our legislators, that we are recognizing that our students are getting on to higher levels of learning not fully capable of demonstrating all that we want them to be able to know. And so they are not finishing the 2- and 4-year college experiences that we would like them to do. We recognize that for many of our students for whom that is appropriate, that they can do it and that they need more support in order to be able to do the kind of thinking that is being called for within college. What we're recognizing, and the reason that we're moving to more common standards across the country, is that the variability of standards across states makes it very difficult for us as a nation to move our students to higher level of learning consistently in a way that will allow us to reach the level of performance nationally that we need in order to compete internationally. So our students need to be brought to new levels, and they need to be done so in a common sense. The common core doesn't necessarily mean that every student will have to learn the exact same thing in the exact same way. It simply bespeaks the nature of the kind of skills and standards that we want all of our students to aspire to and to reach in a way that would allow them to be able to meet the kind of challenges we think they're going to expect in their future careers nationally and internationally. And so we need our students to be able to rise to those challenges in a fairly common way. But those standards are borne out in local curriculum that is designed at the state and local level in ways that still is able to embed the nuances of culture and the critical concerns and issues of any locality, which is, of course, the thing that is most sensitive to us in our localities in terms of our ability to control what our students are learning so that they are prepared for society, both locally and internationally. We know that our students not only need to be prepared for the possibility of college, if that's where they want to go, or to a variety of careers, whether through college or our technical schools, and also that our students are ready for citizenship, which is important for us to know that they are going to have the values and the capacity as young people to be members of our own community and citizens of the world, in fact. So we recognize that our students have to accomplish a variety of critical tasks in order to be able to be ready for the standards that are ahead of them. And so, here you see a list of the critical standards. We are shifting the focus of education within our municipality, and certainly those of my colleagues that are in the audience, in a way that allows them to be able to meet the needs of a more complex curriculum and to be able to reach the skills that more complex standards imply. Learning, just as one example from this list, to be able to write and speak articulately across the curriculum in any critical area, whether it's science or physical education or health, their ability to articulate what they are learning, what it means, and how it will apply to life are critical components of their learning process. So even in math, you see that it's more about conceptual understanding. It's more about being able to make sure that we are increasing the level of rigor for our students and moving them up the rigor level that is necessary for them to meet these more challenging standards. Our students need to be doing statistics and probability from the early grades in elementary on up, and so we can embed these core topics throughout their learning rather than simply having those be the more complex experiences that they have later on in high school. So we recognize that we have to change the core elements within our curriculum for them to be able to accomplish those basic skills. We have to build the conditions for their success. And through that, we have to articulate a different way of coming at our professional development, of building our curriculum, and building our assessments. We are engaged in building a comprehensive assessment plan that allows us to demonstrate within the courses in terms of formative assessments, as well as at the end of courses, and as well as these high-stakes assessments, critical ways in which we can understand how students are doing and continue to analyze their performance in ways that allows us to improve the quality of instruction in order to support the development of our students broadly. We recognize that it changes the nature of the infrastructure that we have to create for our students to move forward. We experienced our piloting of the PARCC with relatively modest challenges. Our students actually loved the online parts. They reflected back to us with feedback that they preferred those approaches. They're much more similar to the way in which they play and learn, or like to learn, and that our students were fairly adept at their ability to make those adjustments. We had to learn how to adapt our accommodations in ways that are causing us to continue to learn how to prepare for more online assessments, but our students, whether the paper and pencil or the online assessments, were quite capable of functioning effectively. We know that we have to build our hardware in order to do more online assessments. We are moving this spring from 2 gigabytes bandwidth as a district to 10 gigabytes, which we know will prepare us for the next generation of infrastructure development here within the system. We have another wave of Chromebooks and laptops coming into the district in a way that is continuing to build our capacity. We believe that we will be on target for meeting the fact that the state is expecting to do 25 of its assessments online in the next year, 50% in the year after that, 75% in the year after that, and 4 years from now, 100% of their testing with PARCC as being online. So we recognize what it will take for us to move in that direction, and we're articulating a plan to make sure that we are on board to making that happen. We recognize, as is often said, that in the first year of PARCC testing, anytime you shift a major administration of assessment, your performance may in fact dip in the first year. Certainly Kentucky's experience indicated that. And so we recognize that initially, as you move from one assessment to another, there will be some adjustment. The state has offered reassurance in this area by indicating a hold harmless provision, which essentially means that if you switch to the PARCC, that if your accountability status goes down in that first year, that you're held harmless, meaning that your performance status stays where it was before in that year, and that you're held harmless for any reductions that occur within that year. If your scores go up, then of course you benefit from those increases, but if it goes down, you are held harmless from that decrease in that particular year. And that offers some reassurance to our teachers that they have some time to learn what is necessary in order to move forward in terms of their overall build up to the instructional skills necessary to help students with these skills in terms of their overall performance. Let me come to my conclusion at this point. So the recommendations, certainly from my staff as we look forward to administering the PARCC, are that we focus on the nature of the professional development that our teachers will need, that we identify the curriculum alignment that we have underway and that we will need in order to make sure that we are able to meet this challenge over the next few years, that we are writing across the curriculum, reading in every area of the curriculum so that we're building those skills for our students. We're engaged in building an intervention strategies throughout the system. We've been doing that regardless of PARCC, but necessary, recognizing there are a variety of interventions that are necessary to continue to support our students as we increase the rigor across our system for all of our students. We want to engage students in increasing their engagement, and we want to make sure that we're being very transparent in our practice as we move forward to change the focus and the skill set that we are building in our students. In summary, College and career readiness for all of our students is certainly a goal. We want all of our students to have a fair chance as they enter into the work world, as they enter into college or into their trades. We want to go to greater depth. It's not simply about breadth, but we think that we're focusing on the skills is the appropriate direction to move in. And so we recognize that these are the critical things that we have to do in order to help students to articulate what they know, but also how they know it in a way that allows them to demonstrate what they have learned. I could say certainly a lot more, perhaps about experience of the administration with PARCC thus far this year, but given the nature of time challenges, I think I'm going to leave it at that point, Madam Chairman, and leave it for my colleagues to also go deeper into the issue.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. Next, we have our Chief Financial Officer, Dr. Ed Gottgard, who will speak of the budget and the financial implications of implementing PARCC in the Framingham Public Schools.
Thank you. I'm that proverbial thorn between the two roses, coming down to the hard numbers. All of us, every district here, all 351 cities and towns and 420 school districts in the Commonwealth are in different places in terms of their technology maturation. Framingham is blessed. We are in a town that has acknowledged the need for technology to be infused into the curriculum. We have been supported financially by the town over the last several years and continue to be significantly supported. So we're lucky. So in terms of that escalator that we're all on that technology escalator, Framingham, I think, is somewhere in the middle. But let me go through what our thoughts are, because we don't have any hard data for what this is going to cost. But this is what we think in terms of our plan, and I'll talk a little bit about what our plan is. Kind of at the macro level, you saw Dr. Scott's slide there before, talked about bandwidth. That bandwidth expansion that Dr. Scott talked about, we project is probably going to cost us around $30,000 to get to that bandwidth that we need, to make that tunnel big enough so that the traffic can fit. In terms of the next kind of macro consideration, it's really about wireless capabilities in our buildings. We have 12 schools. We have 8 elementaries, 3 middles, and a high. And some of them are in better shape in terms of their wireless capabilities than others, having to do with the age of the building, the design of the building. Some of our older, bigger buildings are not very friendly to wireless, but we do the best we can. But we feel to upgrade, in order to have the capacity to support the PARCC testing, we're going to have to spend somewhere around $135,000 just to increase the wireless in our buildings. The next kind of macro cost is the devices themselves. We are a Chromebook district. Some districts have chosen the Apple iPads. We happen to be on the Chromebook list. So we're looking at around $10,000 per cart. A cart consists of 25 Chromebooks that can be moved around. Given the size of our district, we're looking at possibly doing 1 grade in a school per day. So it would be 1 grade for school, and then 3 grades per day. So we're not really able to manufacture a lot of testing, given the fact that the Chromebooks really have to be limited. One of the things that we found out that I think Revere and Burlington also found out is that each of the devices has to be adjusted so that it's a single app, so that students can't go anywhere outside of the PARCC testing. For the iPads, that's pretty expensive. That costs about $8 to $12 per user per year. For the Chromebooks, it's $26 per device in order to equip the Chromebooks. So you can see that the costs are certainly beginning to mount. In terms of the last cost, the one that I think is the most troublesome for all of us, is the support from the technology department. We're planning on having 3 techs in every building. The experiences in Burlington and Revere who have been piloting this said that 46% of the students experienced technology problems in the math portion of the test, and 31% experienced technological problems in the LA portion of the test. That's not acceptable, obviously. So we're thinking we need to have dedicated machines and dedicated staff at the time of the testing. This is not the kind of thing where we can just kind of flip our Chromebooks that are sitting in our schools and say, okay, today we're going to do PARCC testing. I don't think that's going to work. I think we need a dedicated battery of machines. That's kind of what we're thinking, that will move from school to school along with the technology people to support the administration of the test. Then you've got kind of the micro costs, the cost of headphones or earbuds. If you are a Mac or an Apple school, you have to get keyboards, and those are $40 a piece, and the iPad stands are another somewhere between $2 and $40 each. So you can see it can really mount up. We're planning, as I said, on using the Chromebooks en masse that are dedicated strictly and geared up for the PARCC test and moving them from school to school. It'll take us, because we've got 12 schools, it'll take us 12 days. Don't know whether the state's going to allow us to take that amount of time, but at this point, that's what we're thinking. I'm not sure that I can give you any more information at this point. I would urge you to there's a lot of information on the website, the DESE website and the PARCC website, about the experiences not only here in Massachusetts, but outside of Massachusetts. But these are pretty standard costs. You got to think about your bandwidth, you got to think about wireless, you got to think about your devices, and you got to think about the staff to support the administration of the tests. So the Thorn will now turn it over to the other Rose on my right.
The other Rose's thank you, Dr. Gartgott. The other Rose's name is Jay Goodwin. She is an elementary school teacher at the Dunning School in Framingham, and she was the 2010 Massachusetts Teacher of the Year.
Thank you.
Ms. Goodwin.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to thank Bev for inviting me. It's always appreciated when a teacher's voice is welcome to the table. I was asked to speak to you this evening about the nuts and bolts involved in the classroom as we begin to incorporate Common Core standards into our teaching. But to do so, I have to add several more things. I need to add the instructions, the tools, and the time required for assembly. So let's start with the instruction manual. When my daughter Jillian was 2, my grandmother and grandfather came up from Florida and asked me to take them to Toys R Us to buy Jilly her first tricycle. They chose an adorable pink one with streamers and purple stripes, and my grandfather declined the offer of the store to assemble the tricycle because he was a licensed plumber and he was used to putting things together. After 3 hours of effort, Grandpa sheepishly came to me with the box and all the pieces piled back inside, and he asked me to take him to Toys R Us to get the tricycle assembled. Grandpa did know how to put things together, but the instructions were very complicated and somewhat unfamiliar, and they required tools that Grandpa didn't have in hand. Most teachers that I've talked to welcome the Common Core standards. We like knowing what we're responsible for teaching because we want our students to learn and to feel prepared with the tools necessary to navigate all the future challenges they will meet. But like Grandpa, the instructions are still somewhat unfamiliar and sometimes complicated, and certainly we don't yet have all the tools in hand necessary to complete the task. The Common Core standards scale back the amount of required topics to be covered so students can study more depth and less breadth. But to study anything deeply, you must have consistent time to do so. Just like the tricycle instructions that state assembly should take about 2 hours, true success will depend upon the time allowed and the level of understanding. We need to take a look at the way our teaching days are constructed to limit interruptions in the learning to give students the time to explore, discover, and learn. We must also provide time for our teachers to internalize these new standards. Teachers must be given lessons and opportunities to work with colleagues, to collaborate on strategies, and to drill down for deeper meaning. We have begun the process here with initial district-directed professional development, but that is not enough. It will be important to continue this PD, and perhaps more important, to look to the teachers and ask them what kind of professional development they need or they want. Lots of teachers worry that the standards will take away creativity in the classrooms. We hear that a lot. But I think if you truly understand the Common Core, it's actually going to do the opposite. The standards are just that. It's not a curriculum, it's a standard. Yes, they dictate what students will need to know and be able to do, but it's still up to us, the teachers, to figure out how to deliver the instruction depending upon the students that are sitting in front of us at that time. Many of the enrichment projects and the activities we've had to shelve in the past due to the packed timelines of things we needed to cover maybe can have a comeback now. This project-based learning and hands-on activities will help students understand concepts that are embedded in these new standards. In Community 27, my classroom, we're nearing the end of the school year, and my 5th graders have read all different kinds of books this year. I think I finally convinced them that nonfiction does not equate to boring biographies about dead white people from history. And that's a direct 5th grade quote, not from me. Perhaps most important, these students researched an artist driven by big questions that they generated. Let me tell you about one of my students, Ariana. She chose the artist Faith Ringgold. After reading a little bit about her, Ariana began to wonder whether her childhood had influenced her life. This led to her exploring jazz, Harlem, and the Depression to compare what Ringgold had experienced to what was happening at the time that she grew up. Just imagine an 11-year-old, she turned 11 today, beginning a research informational essay like this. How did the Harlem Renaissance influence Faith Ringgold's art? Before this Common Core shift, students would have researched an artist and spit back a plethora of facts about him or her. But these students have not. All their research is focused on utilizing complex text to find and cite evidence to support their questions or claims. Besides this research essay, my students demonstrated their knowledge by creating 3D pop-up books using an online program called ZooBurst. This gave them an opportunity to delve into authors' purpose, nonfiction text structures, and conventions. Working collaboratively with the art teacher, these students were able to create an art piece in the style of the artist they studied. These students' synthesis of information is unparalleled. Not only have they built knowledge through content-rich nonfiction and informational texts, but through close reading, they've created their own. This is happening across all grade levels. My 3rd grade students, I said to them today, I'm going to go give a speech tonight, and they want to know, how has the classroom changed with the Common Core? What should I tell them? This is what they said. Well, you know, Miss Goodwin, anytime we make a claim in any subject area, you always follow it up with, how do you know? Where's your evidence? Why? Okay? We're using this common vocabulary throughout the grades, and this actually happened accidentally at my school during a staff meeting when the lower elementary school teachers overheard our conversation and asked whether it would help us if they used that same language in the 1st and 2nd grade. Help, we said. It would be fabulous. Bring it on. Ratchet up that rigor. Just imagine what could happen if these were opportunities that happened all the time, vertical conversations across grade levels. In math, I only teach ELA, so my math partner pointed to me to the study of fractions. And she said the key shifts are in focus, coherence, and rigor, just what Dr. Scott said. In the past, she taught the students to add, subtract, and multiply, using pictures and maybe eventually symbols. Now that we're implementing the Common Core, students are expected to create concrete, pictorial, and symbolic representations of the fractions they're working with and the operations that they are completing. Topics such as percents have been moved up to the 6th grade, and topics like division of fractions have moved down into the 5th grade, allowing for much more depth of fraction understanding. The shift from focusing on computation to focusing on problem-solving skills is one of the very biggest challenges teachers, parents, and students will face as we work to implement the new standards. I've never met a teacher ever, and I've met them all over the country now, who was against setting a high bar for critical thinking and learning in their classrooms. But we must be mindful of rigorous standards when students come into our classrooms in different places and are being asked to work toward meeting the very same standard. As teachers, we're beginning to delve into the standards. We are finding that it often takes longer to teach, and lessons that are recommended for one day may take 2 or 3 days. When Grandpa Sammy looked at the tricycle instructions, the first hurdle was the tools required for the job. The Common Core presents a twofold challenge in this area. First, as we know, the Common Core has shifted focus in reading to more content-rich nonfiction and informational text. The challenge is acquiring these tools. Most classroom libraries and even school libraries are rich with fiction, but we will need to provide more nonfiction. Of course, one of the biggest hurdles both of my colleagues have mentioned is technology. So much of the standards include opportunities for students to demonstrate their learning technologically, and ultimately we expect these students to take the PARCC test via computer. To do that, students will need basic understandings. Just this week, my students took the MAPS test, which is the only test they've ever taken online, and it was in English Language Arts. And I had several students who did not know, they didn't understand that they needed to scroll down to continue to read the passage they were being asked to answer. We must be sure the students have a fair playing field. The challenge is students have limited keyboarding skills, limited equipment, and limited opportunities to get their hands on technology right now. The good news is that more and more teachers are becoming savvier in this area. At my school, Dunning Elementary, we've created a professional learning community that meets to share ideas and strategies for integrating technology as yet another tool for student learning and success. We must make a commitment to our students to have technology in the classroom so it's a seamless, integrated tool, not a destination like the computer lab you get to visit once a week, if you're lucky. Professional development in this area could also accelerate teacher and then student learning. When Grandpa opened up that tricycle assembly manual, the assumption was that if he followed the directions, the result would be a tricycle ready for my daughter to ride. He had to put a certain amount of trust into the creator of those instructions. So too do we as school boards, administrators, educators, parents, and students. School boards need to allocate the money necessary for school budgets that can provide the teachers with the necessary tools and materials. Administrators need to trust their teachers and give them ownership of curriculum with flexibility to incorporate the standards into their teaching in the best way to reach the students that are currently sitting in front of them. Teachers need to believe that if they ratchet up the rigor, students can still master the standards. Parents need to trust that although the work seems harder and students are being asked to think much more deeply and demonstrate their knowledge in new ways, their children can master the standards. And students will also need to buy into different expectations in our classrooms. Students need to understand and apply their knowledge to everyday life. They need to think. This will take parent education, involvement, and communication, and most of all, it's going to take some time. One way we're beginning to meet this challenge is the creation of new standard-based report cards, with plans to include conversations about them at the upcoming teacher-parent conferences in the fall. 8 years ago, my son Noah, a graduate of Framingham High School, entered Georgia Tech to pursue a degree in computer science. It was really shocking at the parent orientation to be told that the students in his freshman class would need remedial work in writing. Not my son, of course, but the other students in the class. They were just not college ready. The challenge we face today is making sure that the students in our classrooms will stem that tide, entering schools college or career ready, ready to begin successful careers, and maybe even, if we're lucky, ready to have the and gather the necessary tools, read the instruction manual, and devote the time to assemble just one more small pink tricycle.
Thank you, Mrs. Goodwin.
You are welcome.
Your children are very fortunate to have you as their teacher.
And I am fortunate to have them as my children.
Thank you. At this point, I would like to thank the panelists, but we will have a question, answer, and comment and sharing period. And if I can embarrass him to come to the front, could I have our Executive Director, Glenn Kuchar, come to the front and sit just in case there is a technical question? Thank you. We have a chair for you. Thank you. I have my fellow school committee colleague, Heather Connolly, who will go around to the audience with a portable microphone. And who would like to ask the first question? Who would like to ask the second question? Are there any comments? Yes, if you could identify yourself and what school district you're from. Thank you.
Hi, my name is, I'm going to try this without a mic. You can't hear me?
It
You
has
need
to be for the
Oh,
TV recording.
Okay, got it. My name
Thank
is
you.
Tamar, and I'm a 5th grade teacher at Barberry Elementary School in Framingham. Thank you for this forum. And I think for me, I really wanted to echo what the teacher up at the front said. Goodwin? Jane? Nice
Jay.
to meet you. Jay, nice to meet you. To me, the biggest concern is that we are talking more about chasing assessments and initiatives to improve student outcomes instead of actually focusing on what's happening in our classrooms. To me, the focus is much more on what is the assessments to tell us where our students are at, rather than what are the skills, what are the resources, what are the professional development that the teachers need in order to be able to get our students to do what Dr. Scott said, which to me, the biggest thing is student engagement. So today we had our research fair, and I'm a special educator where many of my students have failed the MCAS over and over and over again. And they're now told to take the MAP test, and we're taking the Apprenda test. We have to take DRAs. I mean, it's constant, one test after another. And for the first time, I saw my students so engaged and excited because they were actually focused on doing a research project in which one of their questions was, how do animals survive in the midnight zone in the ocean? I got to see one of my students actually become a leader in the classroom rather than feel like he was less than. To me, that's the question, which is how are we creating those kinds of initiatives rather than actually giving these tests that are actually penalizing our schools and penalizing our students and our teachers. And I appreciate what Dr. Scott's recommendations were. But to me, so far, my experience with Common Core has been very much, I'm for the high standards, and I actually really appreciate knowing what I'm expected to teach my students. However, I'm not being given professional development to do that. Most of my professional development ends up focusing on what is the expectation for my students to be able to get a better score on their tests, not what can I as a teacher do to be able to meet the different needs of my students. And that's where I think we need to focus. I'm also just going to request for those who are from Framingham that we actually encourage the school committee to take a pause on voting on implementing PARCC for next year so that there's actually more discussion to hear from parents, from teachers about what this test is actually going to mean for us.
Thank you. Mr. Kuchar, what is the deadline for telling the Department of Education? And then I'll go to Dr. Scott.
My latest understanding is that there'll be a decision needing to be made by the end of the month, but that there'll be a second chance to reconsider in the fall.
Okay.
But that there may not be enough room in the park system for those people that haven't got reservations in if they elect to stay with it. And the struggle that people are having, I think, is that different districts will just think differently about what they want to do, and interesting strategies are being considered everywhere, and there's no way to predict what those are. They're unique to the districts themselves.
Thank you. Dr. Scott?
That's certainly well put. Part of the reason that I'll be encouraging us to move forward is that it's easy to back down from full implementation of PARCC, but it's not necessarily easy to be in the queue if we want to be in the queue 6 months or a year from now, because the queue may be full at that point. The state will take in a certain number of districts in this first year of the online assessments, and that focus explicitly on PARCC. They don't all have to be online, but if we don't get in the queue, then we won't be able to get in the queue, more than likely, because it's pretty clear that they will reach their limit, as Mr. Kuchar has said. So that's a major reason why I'm certainly asking that we go forward, because we just have to draw a line in the sand at this point and say we might like to go forward, and so we just need to put ourselves in the queue in that regard. I want to speak to some of the very important comments that came up before. It is important that our focus is on the skills and on what our students need to learn, and not on the assessment itself. So I certainly hope that the fact that we have a forum here about the assessment itself doesn't mean that we think that that's actually where the focus is. We are, as we build the new generation of curriculum within the district, we are, with obviously our teachers are leading the charge through the curriculum management team to help us to guide and to build the new curriculum in response to the standards, and the focus is on student skills and on building student engagement. We don't have enough professional development time. That is certainly the truth. And we are continuing to build those in every year, adding another day, certainly as our current contract allows us to do. We have the first draft of the next year of professional development was vetted for the first time this week, as we looked at how we want to support all of our teachers in using Understanding by Design to increasingly design their lessons, to use UDL, so that teachers are thinking about how, in fact, we design our lessons using Research for Better Teaching and helping our principals to be better instructional leaders, using our Teaching and Learning Alliance collaboration to build models and lab classrooms within each school, so that teachers have access to think about high quality instruction. So we know that the issue is supporting teachers to improve instruction, and we're trying to give them all time for more collaboration, more time to design their own learning, and we're trying to listen as carefully as possible, using the curriculum management team with teacher representation, to design the professional development that they feel is most useful to them. We're trying to listen, and we know we have to get better at that. But most importantly, we know that particularly at Barbieri, because it is a two-way immersion school, that the volume of testing is high. It's problematically high. And so as we design our comprehensive assessment plan, the first draft of it was presented at the school committee meeting this week, we know that we have a challenge of figuring out how do we make sure that it's not so much assessment, even in this day where the state is rolling out Teaching Strategies Gold, which is a new assessment for kindergarten or the lower grades. We know we have to figure that out. Part of it is dealing with the mandates that we are asked to respond to. Some of it is not a matter of simple choice. We are sort of a part of the state, and so we have to respond to those mandates, and we have to build also our own internal assessment component so that we can manage learning. It is difficult, but we are in the midst of those decisions and trying to listen as a community to how we grow in this area. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
Thank you. Our next question comes in the back, and then we'll get to you in the front. If you could maybe stand up and introduce yourself and what school committee you're from.
Hi, my name's Adrian Hill. I'm from Dover School Committee. Thank you to the panel for their candor and comments, especially to Ms. Goodwin. Thank you very much. I had two questions. The first one was to Dr. Scott. Could you just help a little bit me understand the concepts of the limit and the queue comments that you made. And apologies if it's a naive question, but I'd love to understand a bit more about that. And then secondly, just to Mr. Kuchar, mentioning the different strategies used by the different districts, but it's all very particular to the district. Is there any way he could be a little less coy and just and perhaps give more specifics? That'd be great.
A certain number of districts will be able to be totally PARCC districts in the first year, and some will continue to do PARCC and MCAS. And so the main choice at this point is whether or not to do PARCC and MCAS or to do just PARCC. At the 10th grade, of course, it will continue to be just MCAS for a while because you can't change the administration of an assessment on students while they are in school. And so eventually PARCC would roll up to the upper grades. So if you want to do PARCC and be a PARCC alone district, then you have to indicate that immediately so that you're able to be among those who have the option to do that. They are managing their slow build up so that they are able to manage the development of their system in a way that they can tolerate or manage within the scope of what their capabilities are to build a statewide assessment across many states. So 20 different states, it's a high volume, and so they're trying to build a system and not crash it in the process. And there are lots of ways in which the volume increasing too rapidly could certainly crash their own system.
With regard to the strategies, some districts want their students to be exposed to the PARCC program ahead of time and get practice taking that kind of a test. Some want to switch to a new system so that they can get a pass for a year and not have to worry about comparing data with previous years. Some want to stick with MCAS because it's the devil they know versus the devil they don't know, and let other people be the experimental classes. And some are also concerned about what happens when you go to a new testing system and have to worry about comparing a PARCC score with an MCAS score. And I use a lot of baseball analogies here in that if you're measuring the performance of a baseball player who hits .350, and in the following year that batter hits .347, is it really so bad that you go from being super duper to just plain super? Are you going to punish a district, or are you going to punish a player for failing to make an improvement? Or what happens if you change from measuring the proficiency of batters from batting average to on-base percentage? Different statistics, and there's little confidence in some districts that the media will relay this appropriately as they report testing scores like sports box scores, or that the state will be fair and reasonable in applying its voluminous sanctions upon districts because there's a miscalibration. Now, all of those things go into a district's decision, plus all kinds of other districts. What do the faculty members think when you consult with the teachers? What do the school committee hear from the parents? It'll be any kind of a number of factors.
I must add, if I may, I've spent a good deal of time talking with Bob Pinkerton at the state and his team. The psychometricians who are managing the calibration between the old test and the new test have convinced me that they are being very thoughtful and careful about managing the issue that Glenn Kuchar speaks to there, that to make sure that the tests in terms of measuring progress and indicating degrees of progress will be comparable and effectively related to each other, and in terms of their overall composite performance indices will also be effectively able to do that. So I am trained as a psychometrician, so I've had to listen very carefully so that they would satisfy me, so that I could feel like I could convince my team that it's a reasonable choice just to leap into it at this point rather than simply waiting and lagging behind. I'd rather just get the system accustomed to dealing with the new assessment and move on with it.
Thank you. We have a question in the front. Please identify yourself and your school committee. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Greg Liakos. I'm a member of the Wakefield School Committee. Also work during my day job at the Massachusetts Cultural Council. My question is, given that the PARCC, like the original MCAS, will measure English language arts and mathematics, and given that this is going to take a significant increase in resources for the teachers in those subjects, and is going to potentially increase the time that students are testing on those subjects, I'm concerned that the PARCC and the Common Core standards will narrow the curriculum and take away time devoted to other subjects like history, the arts, science, and physical education, for example. So I'm wondering if you share those concerns.
Thank you. Excellent question. I don't share those concerns because of some very clear reasons we've been spending some time thinking about. You noticed me refer to the issue of reading and writing across the curriculum. And part of our challenge is to make sure that our PE teachers, our art teachers, our teachers in all subjects are recognizing their role in helping students to write and helping students to be able to read and read with understanding. And that's something we've been working toward. MCAS pointed us in that direction, but I think that the PARCC will actually sort of really focus us on the importance of moving in that direction, making all subjects a part of the process of helping our students demonstrate what they know and build these skills. The PARCC is different from MCAS in that it is actually more carefully timed. And many students actually are finishing their assessments in shorter periods of time than the actual allotted time, which are time fixed, and therefore shorter than students having the capacity to do the test for all day. Now, there's ongoing conversations about the accommodations and how much time students who have accommodations will have on the quote-unquote time test, but my sense is that it will probably be less than it has been in the past, which actually ultimately has a secondary benefit of students not spending quite so much time in the assessment mode as we have in the past.
I'd just like to add something to that. I think that, gone are the days when we imagine reading and writing as separate subjects. So I think when we think about twofold collaboration between teachers, so that in the elementary school, we are collaborating with the art teacher, and if whatever she's teaching, we are trying to work with her or she with us, so that gives more time for the actual subject. I also think that when we think about children learning strategies for reading, we're using a lot of we will be using lots of informational text from other subjects. So the teaching of reading can be happening during the understanding of a piece on the Boston Tea Party. So they're really learning history, but we're teaching them the reading strategies. So if there was more integration of those things, which they're leading us to do, there will actually be more opportunities than maybe we have now. You're right, there are certain subjects that we struggle to get to because we have so many things that are necessary that we need to cover in a year. So we have to find ways to more incorporate those things together so we can reach those topics that you're talking about. Science is really hands-on, but there's a lot of reading that goes on during science. And just this past year, my fifth graders were doing experiments, but part of the formative assessment as we were going around was they were actually talking to each other about what they had found, and that's one of the standards. You need to be able to explain what you see. So the reading that was necessary to understand what they were talking about was a way to teach reading, writing, public speaking, as well as the concepts of science.
Thank you. We have a question to the left. You're right.
Frank S. Sherbin. I know that the first couple of years they'll be adjusting the test and calibrating and so forth, but how certain can we be that the state will actually go ahead and make this the actual choice for the test in the future? I mean, because otherwise, they could lead us down this path and they could decide otherwise.
Yes, we certainly have raised our concerns that there might be shifts. Frankly, I'm hoping that they simply continue the course and move in this direction since they've decided to do it. What is clear to me is that there's clear conviction that there needs to be the next generation of assessment, and that the worst case scenario is that if they didn't go with the park, that they would have to upgrade MCAS, certainly to be more in line with the new standards that we are moving to as a state and that we are moving to as a nation. So that upgrade would have to, some of the same things would occur that are occurring with park, meaning a new administration of an assessment, new calibration, new preparation, new professional development, and all of the elements would still be a part of it. They might have to slightly delay their progression. If we did adopt and move in the early phase and they somehow decided to shift to another direction, you know, we'd be relying upon the calibration of assessments from MCAS to park to whatever comes next, back to MCAS or whatever, MCAS 2. But it would be relatively similar process and similar calibration. I don't think that it would affect us on the ground per se. We'd be still accomplishing all the things that you hear Ms. Goodwin speaking of, and hopefully limiting our students so they're not taking both park and MCAS, and then certainly you hear all the other assessments that we're also using.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, or two questions. Okay. If you could introduce yourself, say which finance committee you're on.
I thought you didn't know who I was, and I was going to help you with my name. My name is Betty Funk, and I'm on the Framingham Finance Committee. And my children did go to school here, and my grandchildren also have gone to school here. So I try to be a big supporter of the Framingham school system. I think we have a rather unique challenge here. I'm not even going to call it a problem. That is that we've just been through an extraordinarily difficult budget period, where we did work so closely together, the Board of Selectmen, the Finance Committee, the School Committee, and the administration, with good credit to the superintendent, to reach a conclusion that appeared to be a way to move forward to do some very specific things. And paramount to the Finance Committee was his whole issue of moving out of level 3 status and into level 2 and level 1. And we all knew that through all of our discussions. And honestly, lots of the votes that you got in the town meeting, and it was a wonderful discussion, I think, by the time we got there, was the trust that people in the community, at least represented by the town meeting, had in the Board of Selectmen, the Finance Committee, the School Committee, and the Superintendent, that in fact the dollars that were added to this budget would be used to make that change. Now, I'm not going to comment whether I'm for or against this. It sounds wonderful to me personally, but the Finance Committee hasn't taken that up. But here we are now, just beyond the town meeting, with something that could cost more than we designed in our planning, and more importantly, how are we going to do the comparison between the MCAS scores that we're trying to raise and a new way of thinking about testing people? Mr. Kuchar has already commented on that a little bit, and so has the superintendent, but I thought that I should say something since such faith was built into the discussions that led to the support for the budget. Could you address that, please? And thank you very much.
I'd be eager to. We embedded within our projections for this year an increase in technology resources in the system in a significant way. The capacity to build our infrastructure, as I mentioned, from 2 gigabytes to 10 gigabytes, we're hoping to accomplish that by August the 15th, thereabout. That's an important starting place. We are putting 50 more Chromebooks in each school this year, K to 8, recognizing that that's an important next step. I was sitting here thinking I'd love for it to be about 4 times that much, frankly, if I were doing a 3-year progression toward district readiness. So that gives you somewhat of a sense of what the scope is and how fast we could be moving versus how fast we are moving. But that said, we are trying to build enough capacity to at least make sure we are ready to do what the state is requiring for us to do, and we believe that we are moving in the right direction. I was also sitting here, Ms. Fung, thinking about how the town has asked us to think about the next couple of years of funding with respect to infrastructure for technology as we sort of end the first 4-year phase and get ready for the next. And we need to come back with numbers that make fairly explicit, what will it take to do the technology upgrade with respect to devices? And that was less the focus in the earlier initiative than it is perhaps now. I'll only say in one sentence, again, that I believe that the comparisons between MCAS and PARCC will be sufficient for us to be able to tell the story of improvement in a longitudinal way without interruption, given this change of assessment, and I'm fairly convinced of that, or I would have a different recommendation.
Thank you. For question?
Hi, I'm Jim Stockless with the Framingham School Committee, but I'm asking this question more as a parent. Over the years, my biggest struggle with MCAS has been I've watched my kids take it and take all the time out of class and time off learning to take this assessment, but it doesn't really help them as individual students because the results don't come along until the next year when they've moved on. Is there a way that you envision PARCC addressing that concern so all this time spent assessing can help the individual student that's being assessed?
Glad to answer that, and maybe some of my colleagues might like to chime in. But over time, starting at the end and working back, once PARCC is completely online, the assessment information will have a rather immediate turnaround. In the first 3 years, as it's partial, to the degree to which there are online assessments, you have to wait till those online assessments to come in before releasing any scores, both the online ones, which can come back quickly, and the paper pencil tests. So after we've moved to being fully online, the return actually will be more useful in a formative sense in terms of informing instruction more immediately. And there are formative components of PARCC that will be able to inform instruction over the course of the year, even in the initial implementation, I believe. So that's helpful. MCAS, as a statewide policy, was designed to improve instruction and impact students, if you will, albeit indirectly, by supporting teachers, albeit a lagging indicator, in the quality of their instruction as they're able to look back over the prior year and the prior group of students and determine where they are. And we all can acknowledge how awkward it is to be judged on the basis of your current performance based on what you did last year. But if we move that aside for the moment, we all know that there are limitations in terms of the way state mandates and state policy sometimes plays out on the field. Our challenge is to figure out how to use the information that we do have to get better, to master whatever assessment someone puts in front of us, frankly, and object to those if we can that we think we must, but at the same time to move the system forward to being good at the assessments that we are being measured on, and to in any way we can use them to drive us toward better performance. And whether it's a lagging indicator or a present indicator or a leading indicator, we certainly need to use those to find ways to improve our system as well as what's happening in the classroom.
I'd like to add something to that one, too. I hear what you're saying, and I just want to correct you on just one thing. Even though the students don't get even though the scores don't come until the following year, so for example, my sitting fifth graders, when I began the year, I saw, when the scores came out, I saw their fourth grade scores. So I could look at my current students and see how they did on certain types of questions or certain questions in general. So it did inform my instruction with those students in the current year that I had them, even though the tests happened the year before. So for example, you know, if I had a student who didn't do really well on open response questions, or if 40% of my class did not do well on open response questions on the fourth grade test, then I know that that's something I need to work on with my students in the current year, because it's likely they wouldn't do well in open response questions again. So I think it does help you. And one other thing, you know, we are learning now, teachers, more how to look at data. That's something that we really haven't had a lot of professional development on in the past. And there's a big thrust right now for us as teachers, and a lot of pressure actually, for us on teachers to really be looking at the data and diving into the data and figuring out how to drive our instruction and teach our students better. So we have had some professional development, but more of that is needed for us, because in order to do it well, we really have to understand how to do it. And we're not all trained in how to read data and how to have it drive our instruction. So twofold, we do it. You may not be as much aware of it, but we do look at data from the previous year.
Thank you. I was going to have my closing remarks. I was quoting an amazing op-ed article that was written by a fellow school committee member, Dr. Eric Silverman. I'm so pleased to see he's in the audience. And being a professor of higher ed at Wheelock College, I'd like to know if you would like to give some closing remarks. Could I put you on the spot, Eric? Thank you. Heather?
Thank you. And you did put me on the spot, but my kids and students do that as well. So what I might say is, as a parent, and next year I'll have 2 kids in the Framingham High School, and they've moved their way through. I absolutely bemoan the fact that, as many of you do, that standardized assessment has become so central to the educational process. I wish it was possible to devote much more time to individualized learning, to developmentally appropriate kinds of pedagogies, to enhancing music, drama, the arts. I'm a social scientist, history. And my sense is that in the absence of really just an educational revolution in the United States, that's not going to happen. And that in effect, these sorts of standardized testings is the system that we're going to live with, at least for the foreseeable future. And I don't really see any practical alternative that's sort of coming down the pike, in the near future. That said, I think that from what I've seen and from what I've heard, I think that PARCC it sounds to me like it is more appropriate, from my perspective, than the existing MCAS. I'm very deeply mindful that we need more professional development for our teachers, more assistants. I hear them, I hear the parents, but my sense is that it will be better for our kids to embrace PARCC as opposed to staying with the MCAS, and to do what we can to kind of make the best of PARCC and the Common Core. And I'm actually a fan of the Common Core. I think if it's implemented properly, it will be a step forward. And I also think, in effect, that much of this is being mandated. And the earlier that we kind of embrace this and go with it, the greater the chance of success, the greater the opportunity we might have to shape things, to change things, to modify it, to kind of claim ownership over it. So my sense is that in the situation today, I think we really need to sort of go forward with this, put our faith in our senior leadership teams of each of the districts, in our teachers, and while we all are cognizant of the criticisms, I think that the sooner we really just embrace it and go forward with it, the more likely we are to shape it in a way that works the best for the kids who are ultimate charge. And so as a parent and as a school committee member, I sort of encourage us to do what we can to move forward with the system. As a college professor, I would say that from what I've seen, I think the Common Core in the PARCC will in fact prepare students to be more successful citizens, more successful critical thinkers, and to go on to greater success, whether they pursue higher education or they pursue their sorts of careers. So I mean, my sense is that it's always better to seize these sorts of things as early as possible and to do what you can to kind of to take ownership of them, to modify them, and to, I think the earlier you adopt it, the more likely it is that they'll lead to greater success for our students. So I would encourage us to kind of to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Silverman. Sorry for putting you on the spot. At this point, we are over time. I do want to thank our panelists, our legislators, Ken Schiffman with the Framingham High School TV producers, I know it's a busy time of year. I want to thank you all for attending and performing your public service with due diligence. We do have the room for about 15 more minutes, so if you would like to, for Division 2 members, we're going to have a quick 5-minute meeting. We're going to have elections and a quick update. And during that time, if the others would like to step into the hallway, enjoy the refreshments, talk and gather. And most of our panelists will be there if you would like to ask any personal questions. I'd like to join me in a round of applause.